It's time for an update on Scotland's conversion therapy ban, because it's shaping up to be the most restrictive, illiberal and frightening conversion therapy ban in the world. The Scottish Government often like to pride themselves on being the most progressive country in the world. They're leading in a certain area, leading in the wrong direction. And that's what's happening here. Why is it so extreme in Scotland? Partly it's the government, partly it's the total lack of opposition in the Parliament. Not a single MSP is opposing the conversion therapy ban. Not one. And it is appalling what they're coming up with. It is very, very extreme. So I'm going to have a look at a new document that's been produced by the Expert Advisory Group on Ending Conversion Practices Report and Recommendation. Just came out a few weeks ago. But before I look at the document, let's have a look at the balanced cross-section of opinions they've gathered together to put on this expert group. Well, we've got Blair Anderson. He's the man who led the campaign to get a conversion therapy ban. Someone from Edinburgh University, don't know anything about him. Someone from an LGBT plus Sikh organisation. Someone from a church, but the Church of Scotland. So you can guess where she'll be coming from. Someone from LGBT Youth Scotland, someone from the Equality Network, someone with lived experience, in other words, someone who's claiming they were harmed by so-called conversion therapy, someone from the NHS, sadly, you know where they'll be coming from as well, someone from a sort of black, well, quasi-Christian LGBT organisation called House of Rainbow, Stonewall Scotland, Metropolitan Community Church. That's a church that I don't know if it defines itself as an LGBT church, but I think that's sort of more or less its main emphasis. The Coalition Against Conversion Therapy, someone from Scottish Trans, someone else with lived experience, and someone from the Scottish Human Rights Commission. Scottish Human Rights Commission is just a group of progressive activists funded by the government wearing a sort of human rights hat. So that's the balanced cross-section of opinion they've brought together to produce this document. And, well, that explains why it's so extreme and unbalanced and so concerning. So let's have a look what the Expert Advisory Group is telling the government what to do. In fact, in other words, let's see what the government is going to do. Because as though the government has no mind of their own, they just say to these activists, tell us what to do, and they do it. And the other parties in the Parliament just say, on this topic, just say, okay. And even in people you think probably are not too keen, they just think, best not say anything, a bit risky, bit of a hot potato this one. I'll just keep my head down and let it pass through. And if, Christian leaders, Muslim leaders, all sorts of other people, parents, wind up being prosecuted, well, that's their problem. I don't want to risk my career by saying something too controversial in the Parliament. But anyway, let's see what they've got to say. Right, the group believes that conversion practices infringe upon the human rights of individuals. In particular, the victim's freedom from discrimination and freedom from non-consensual medical treatment. Okay, infringes human rights. So if someone goes to someone and said, could I speak to you about my gender identity? Sometimes I feel like I want to be the opposite sex. I don't want to go down that road. Can we talk about it? Can you help me with my problem I've got? Well, if that person says, yes, I'll talk to you about that. I'll see if I can help you with this problem. Then that is a form of discrimination. It's one of those, it's so bizarre, the claim. It's hard to even know where to start to refute it, because there's no argument there at all. But that is a form of discrimination, and it's also a form of non-consensual medical treatment. Non-consensual medical treatment. So the person asked for this conversation, and it's not a form of medical treatment, but according to this expert group, it is non-consensual medical treatment. Right, conversion practices can also violate the prohibition of torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. Just where do you start with that? It's such bizarre, excessive, hysterical language, but it passes in the Parliament without comment because it doesn't get challenged in the Parliament, and it needs to be challenged. Right, carrying on. The group advises that ending conversion practices will not lead to the unlawful restriction of existing freedoms. Really? So tell the people they're not allowed to seek help for themselves to fulfill their own vision for their own life. So if you tell people they're not allowed to seek that help, then that's not restricting their freedoms. If you're saying to people they're not allowed to express their view to other people, or they're not allowed to advise them or encourage them in a certain direction, that doesn't restrict their freedoms. Again, where'd you start? It's parallel universe stuff. And that includes freedoms of speech, religion, and belief. So your freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of belief are not infringed at all by telling you you're not allowed to say what you believe on the basis of your religion to other people. Okay, have you got that clear? Good. Right, we can carry on then. The group's position is that where expression creates the potential of significant harm to others, a prohibition of a practice is justified and necessary as a proportionate way of protecting the interests of the victims and does not unlawfully interfere with the human rights of the providers of conversion practices. I mean, that's true. I mean, rights do get restricted when there's good reason, but they don't offer the good reason there. They just assume it. Right, the group recommends that the definition of conversion practices must apply equally to sexual orientation, expression of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression must be wide enough to encompass any treatment, practice, or effort. Any effort. I mean, that can cover absolutely anything, can't it? That aims to change, suppress, or eliminate a person's sexual orientation, expression of sexual orientation, gender identity, and or gender expression. So parents saying to a little boy, no, come on, boys don't wear dresses, don't wear that, don't wear your sister's clothes. Then that would obviously be a clear-cut case of conversion therapy. Similarly, if someone, an adult were to go to, let's say a Muslim goes to the imam and says, can I speak to you about, sometimes I think, I'm attracted to men. Sometimes I think I'm attracted to women. I really don't want to be attracted to men. Can you help me with it? Can I talk to you about it? I just want to talk to someone because I'm quite worried about it. I'm quite upset about it. I need some support. Then if the imam said, yeah, okay, let's talk about that, then conversion therapy. Because the imam would be agreeing with him. He'd be saying, yes, I agree with you that that's the direction you should be taking your life in. So that would be conversion therapy, and that should be illegal. It says the inability to consent to conversion practices should form part of the definition of conversion practices. Now, they're not saying that it's only conversion practice if there's a lack of consent. They're saying the definition of conversion practices means that you cannot consent. Okay, so if someone goes along, as I say, and goes to someone and said, please, can you help me with this problem I've got? I'd like you to help me to, move away from this sexual attraction, move away from this gender identity issue. Okay, so even though the person's asked for it and it's to fulfill their own vision for their own life, they're claiming the very definition of conversion therapy says that they can't actually be consenting. So when the person says, no, it is what I wanted, I went and asked for this because it's what I wanted, they would say, no, you didn't. You can't have wanted it because the definition says so. The group recommends that the existence of specific intent to cause harm, malice or ill will is not required for an act to be considered a conversion practice and should therefore not be included as any part of any criminal offence. In other words, if someone says, I was just trying to help them. They came to me, they wanted some help. I was just trying to help. No defence. No defence. You're a conversion therapy practitioner and say you're a criminal. That's the way we're heading. Right, the group recognises the need to facilitate, enable or encourage efforts which take place in a supportive and affirmative environment and are led by the recipient's autonomous decisions. So they're saying the sort of counselling and support LGBT, whatever people can have, should receive, can seek, is the sort of support that says, yes, that's fantastic that you're gay, that you're bisexual or whatever. Well, that's fantastic that you're transgender. Okay? And they're allowed to seek that because that's led by the recipient's autonomous decisions. In other words, the only type of decision that's autonomous is the one to go down that path. The person who decides they don't want to go down those paths, that's not an autonomous decision. Some other influence caused them to make that decision. They didn't actually make it for themselves. The only autonomous decision is to seek affirmation in LGBT lifestyle identity practices, whatever. Right, continuing. Any act, treatment or effort whether immediate or cumulative, with a specific intent to change, suppress, or inhibit someone's sexual orientation, expression of sexual orientation, gender identity, and/or gender expression, should be criminalised in Scotland. Okay, criminalised. So the police involved, going to court, prosecuted, fined, who knows what else. We'll look at some of the other consequences they're suggesting later on as well. It also says referring a person for the purpose of conversion practices should also be a crime. So if someone said to their child, say a parent said to their child, look, I think it'd be good if you spoke to the priest about this. Broken the law. That parent has broken the law by suggesting that someone go and speak to the priest about one of these issues, knowing that the priest would try and steer them in a certain direction that they think is the right direction. The person who pointed them there would be a criminal, according to these proposals. I call them proposals. I mean, this is what the bill is going to reflect, because there's no other proposals there. There's no alternative viewpoint. This is just going to float through the Parliament unopposed. Right, next one. For sentencing of the criminalised acts, the group recommends 3 key aggravating factors to be considered. First of all, if it's a child, or if the person is in a situation of dependence, which is also a child. So parents in their own home with their own children, advising, counselling, supporting their own children, trying to pass on their own values to their own children, that's very definitely covered by this. And it says later on, if children in school will be told about, conversion therapy is bad, this is what it is, this is how you report it, and that's what will start happening. Children will start reporting their parents to various hotlines and people at school or whatever for committing so-called conversion therapy. Organisations engaged in any of the criminalised acts do not receive preferential tax status or benefit from public subsidies. In other words, a church, for example, would lose its charitable status if it's found that representatives of the church are counselling people about, say, same-sex attraction and helping them to move away from it, or to suppress it, to not act on it, then they could lose charitable status. But to be honest, I would say to any organisation that's involved in this sort of area, I would say drop your charitable status now in any case. If you try and keep it, you're constantly under the influence of the government, and the government uses it to steer you in a certain direction and to mould your views and to mould your behaviour. And I would suggest to a lot of organisations, a lot of religious bodies, I would suggest don't be a charity. You're putting yourself under the yoke of the government, under the influence of the government. And I think it's very, very unhelpful. Right, what else does the group recommend? The group recommends that where the perpetrator, wow, of any of the criminalised acts is a healthcare professional, the legal consequences may include the withdrawal of the perpetrator's professional licence. So end their career. Someone's trained as a doctor for however many years, but if they just have the wrong conversation with someone, strike them off. Strike them off, as well as what other fines and whatever might be imposed. I would describe the tone of this document as vindictive. Their basic approach is we're going to get them by any means we can. Nothing's too good for them. We just really want to hammer them from every possible direction. That's the ethos, shall we say, of this document. The group recommends that where the perpetrator of any of the criminalised acts is a faith leader or a member of a religious institution, the legal consequences may include the withdrawal of the perpetrator's professional licence as a faith leader, or removal of their ability to work within Scotland in the said institution, or withdrawal of the institution's charity status, etc. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, what sort of licence do you need to be a faith leader? You need a licence to conduct weddings, etc. Do you need more than that? But it almost sounds as if they would like it that preachers, pastors, ministers, priests, whatever, need to be licensed by the government. So the government can revoke the licence of religious leaders if they don't quite toe the line. I believe that will have a similar system in China, which I believe is quite effective, but there is an underground church that defies that. Right, therapeutic professionals should be specialists and informed by those with lived experience. In other words, the people writing this stuff should train the professionals who are going to deal with people who've allegedly been harmed by so-called conversion practices. So the professionals, they're not going to be guided by evidence or medical training or psychiatric training or whatever. They're to be guided by the people who've got a story to tell and an axe to grind. They're the people who are going to train the professionals. Right, conversion practices result in psychological harm to the victim. Medical institutions must be trauma-informed and create safe spaces for survivors. They must encourage trust and provide choice for survivors by providing clear and consistent information as well as options for treatment and care. They must work with and empower survivors whilst taking into account and respecting all aspects of a person's life, experience and identity. So it sounds like, the red carpet's going to be laid out and they're going to be given like fantastic special treatment on an ongoing basis. And one of my thoughts about that is, how much is this going to cost? I don't think it's really necessary. How much is it going to cost? Well, they don't seem to be too bothered about that. And it talks about, we need special systems for reporting conversion practice. Again, they will be presented to school children as well. They'll be told how to report this sort of thing in case any adults in your life have said inappropriate things or have engaged in conversion practices in the conversations they've had with you. And the children will be made very aware of what's happening. Other options to enforce it could include targeted education. In other words, right, Dad, you need to come on our training course, our special LGBT awareness training course. You've got to come to it. It says a written notice from the perpetrator agreeing to cease the practice. So mum and dad have to write a document to present to the government promising that they won't say to their child again, now come on, it's probably just a phase. We don't think you should really change your name and things at the moment. Can we not just wait a little while? They'd have to, give some sort of signed statement saying they would refrain from such behaviour in the future. Okay, guiding principles we're on to now. The group considers that the underlying purpose of ending conversion practices is to ensure that everyone can participate in a society in which they can live freely and express their sexual orientation and gender identity. Right, what connection does that have with people seeking help or receiving advice or people expressing their views to LGBT people? It's got no connection at all. In what sense does that prevent them from participating in society and prevent them from freely living and expressing their sexual orientation and gender identity? I mean, it doesn't. Right, for LGBT plus people, the full realization of their human rights cannot be achieved while practices intended to limit, suppress or eradicate their sexual orientation or all those other things are legal. So your human rights are not being achieved while someone's allowed to go and see someone and ask for help to talk about an issue with regard to their gender identity, for example. As long as that's allowed to happen, the human rights of everyone who's LGBT plus, their human rights are not being fulfilled. Their human rights have been denied because someone's allowed to go and seek support and prayer or whatever, spiritual support, practical support, counselling for a move in a different direction. Again, it's ridiculous overstatement with no foundation, but it exists because it's not challenged. It's like a bubble, if you like. It's like a logical bubble. All it needs is someone to come along and prick that with a pin in conversation and it completely falls to bits. But will that happen in the Scottish Parliament? No. No, it would. Right, we agree with the United Nations independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity that effective measures need to exist to ensure that LGBT plus people have the opportunity to find happiness through the fulfillment of aspirations connected to the orientation and identities that are inherent to them. So having the opportunity to find happiness through the fulfillment of aspirations connected to orientation. Well, in what sense has that been denied to anyone? It's not at all. It's completely irrelevant. Completely irrelevant. Right, what do we hear? The group does not consider that a ban on conversion practice leads to an unlawful restriction on freedom of religion or freedom of expression. Numerous religious groups have declared their support for the prohibition of conversion practices. So, to find out if something restricts religious freedom, you speak to the small minority, probably, of religious groups that agree with you and say, look, because they agree, it's okay to restrict the freedom of the others, and that can't really be restricting their freedom, because it's not restricting the freedom of the people who agree with us. And again, it's totally contentless, but will probably be completely unchallenged. Right, definition. We get to the definitions now of conversion practice. Conversion practice refers to any treatment, practice, or effort that aims to change, suppress, and or eliminate a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, and or gender expression. A person cannot consent to conversion practices being carried out against them. Carried out against them. So when the person goes to speak to someone and says, please can you help me with this issue, because I'm seeking to make this change in my life, or seeking to avoid going down this path, then the person who helped them is carrying out conversion practice against them. Now, this just made me think of someone I know I had a chat to a few weeks ago, and it's someone who's had some issues with transgenderism. That they've had phases where they've dressed as a woman, so acted as a woman, but that's not the road they want to go down. When they're in that phase of life, that's a bad phase. It goes with heavy drinking, sometimes drugs. That's the bad phase of life. And when they're out of that, they're much happier, but then sometimes they'll lapse back into it, and they don't want to do that. And so I chatted to this person about it. Now, if someone was watching that, if this was law, someone watching that conversation, I'm pretty sure the things I would have said would have counted as conversion therapy, and I was carrying out conversion practices against this person I was having a chat to. And that person wanted support. They wanted to talk about it. They wanted help. And they wanted to live their life in a way that didn't involve these lapses into transgenderism, basically. Right, gender identity, how do they define that? It refers to each person's internal and individual experience with gender, which may or may not correspond with their sex assigned at birth, including their personal sense of the body, which may involve, if freely chosen, modification of bodily appearance and or functions by medical, surgical, or other means, and other expressions of gender, including name, dress, speech, and mannerisms. So basically, you cannot suggest anything to an LGBT plus person to do with any of those things, no matter their age, to suggest anything that would question anything they're doing or way they're behaving or any plans they have for the future is conversion therapy. Now, to suppress, that's an interesting one. So, for example, I think normal Christian teaching would be if someone says they've got, for example, homosexual desire, the teaching would be that's something that shouldn't be acted on. We would hope that maybe they could change to a heterosexual desire. That might happen, it might not. But if while someone's got homosexual desires, then they will be encouraged not to enter into a homosexual sexual relationship. And that's exactly what they mean by to suppress. So that sort of conversation, which is probably quite common between, for example, church leaders, I'm sure other religious leaders as well, maybe parents as well, with their children, that sort of conversation would be criminalized. Now, to inhibit, if you prevent or prohibit a person's sexual orientation, now prohibiting it, would that cover just the teaching of mainstream religions? I suspect it probably would. Right, consent and coercion. We are clear that as they constitute a human rights violation, it is not possible for individuals to genuinely consent to conversion practices being carried out against them. Again, I mean, the logic of that, as they constitute a human rights violation, which they don't, but that's their reason to say it's not possible to consent. So this person I was talking to about their sort of lapses into transgenderism and the fact they didn't want those, then my conversation with them constituted a human rights violation for that person who was wanting to talk about the problem and wanting support relating to it. I mean, it's quite bizarre. We understand that conversion practices are not normally carried out by lone individuals, but usually with the support of others, whether that be family or community members or faith organisations. So they're basically saying, if it's happening within an organisation, we need to nail the whole organisation. They're all responsible for it. So you can imagine some religious organisations, for example, I mean, certainly a lot of schools or whatever, they're going to play safe and instruct their staff and representatives, just don't go near this, because we're in big trouble if we have an accusation of this. Just don't go near it. If someone comes to you seeking support, if they want to talk about this issue and they want you to help them, just tell them you can't, because we can't risk it. Our legal officer says you just can't even think about doing that. You've got to issue the instruction. You can't do it. And if you do it, you'll be fired. That's the sort of direction things will head in. No defence for consent. I mean, they've said that already, but they're saying, so if someone's charged with this crime and they say, but the person wanted it, they asked for it, that's no defence, obviously, according to them. Right, it says, in some cases, people who carry out acts or practices that would fall under the definition of conversion practices may not view these acts as either harmful or as attempting to change someone's sexual orientation, gender identity, expression of sexual orientation, gender expression, but rather as helping or supporting them. However, we believe that this motivation should not be relevant and that there need to be no specific intent to cause harm for the act of conversion practices to be a criminal offence. So if I was in court and said, look, I was just talking to this person, I know we were just having a conversation, he asked me about it, and, I was just trying to help him, I was just trying to support him. That's no defence. The prosecution lawyer could say, it's no defence. It's guilty as charged. Right, children. Where parents or guardians have engaged in conversion practices, like said to a child, we don't believe that same-sex relationships are a good thing, or they've said, boys don't wear dresses, or we really don't think it's a good idea to change your gender identity. Let's just slow down a bit here. Let's see if we can explore what this is all about. Let's see what's behind it. Let's see if we can try and get behind it, and then maybe you won't feel this way anymore. So those sort of parents we're talking about. The modification or even withdrawal of their parental or guardianship rights is envisaged as an option. In other words, take the children away. Take the children away from the parents. Now, remember what I was saying, the people who've put this together, I would describe them as vindictive. They would stop at nothing, would do anything against people who are basically not sharing their ideology. That's what's underneath it. Vindictive. Right, the Victorian law, that's talking about Victoria in Australia. So law in Australia focuses on the intention of the practice rather than the form or manner in which the practice is performed. We recommend a similar approach in Scotland. So again, if you're in court and you say, we're just talking about it, just having a chat, or I was just praying with him, or I just suggested some websites that might be helpful. That's it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you did. The important thing was what you were intending. You were intending to help that person make the change that they're hoping to make themselves. So because you're intending to help that person achieve their own goals for their own life, you're guilty. Okay? Not interested in any defences, you're guilty. It doesn't matter what you did. If that's what you're intending, if you're intending to help that person, you are guilty. Okay, religious and cultural obligations play a huge part in why people may suppress being LGBT+. These norms are enforced and embedded from early childhood. It's terrible indoctrination into mainstream religious teaching, often in subtle ways which impact significantly. God, it really sounds like we need to rescue children from these religious parents, doesn't it? The importance of marriage is one such obligation. You got that? So teaching children the importance of marriage is part of what contributes to these religious and cultural obligations that basically are problematic or harmful in some way to LGBT plus people, or make them feel that there's something wrong with themselves. So teaching about the importance of marriage is a bad thing, according to this Scottish Government document. These ideas become cemented in the psyche, meaning that many people self-monitor and self-police without an explicit force being present. For example, by abstaining from any relationship if they're LGBT plus or attempting to be straight. So they're basically saying that some people sort of experience guilt when they think about the possibility of going down a sort of LGBT path. They feel it's something they ought not to do, and they're explaining that this just comes from the way they're brought up. My personal view, that it comes straight from someone's conscience, which is a faculty that does give us direct access to what's right and wrong. We'll talk about it a lot more, but I'll leave it at that for now. So what I would say is, it is guilt from our conscience. They're saying it's produced by the way people get brought up. That's the real issue. Right, external and internal pressure to conform can create feelings of shame, guilt, anxiety, low self-esteem, feeling out of place, uncomfortable, abnormal and bad, with people feeling like they do not belong or are living fraudulently. Again, I would suggest possibly in some of those cases what people are describing, well, it says guilt there, but the question is whether or not the guilt is justified or not justified. Some people would think that it is, some people think that it's not. But they take it for granted here that any guilt or aversion to LGBT, again, lifestyles, decisions, whatever, is not rational. Well, it's not justified guilt. It's unjustified guilt. So what we've got here is a really extreme proposal that will go into law, as I say, because there's no opposition to it. And I do think with this conversion therapy ban in Scotland, that will go through in this form, I'm pretty sure, maybe this will just be what starts to wake people up. Because there's going to be a lot of religious leaders in particular are going to find themselves prosecuted for this. Partly in the genuine performance of their duties, and partly because there'll be sting operations. People will join churches, they'll go to mosques or whatever, other Hindu temple, whatever. They'll go along and they'll deliberately wheedle their way in and then seek support from someone, report it on their phone, and then get them prosecuted. Phone the police, get them arrested, and then chalk up another victory, then go on to the next one. Now with parents, let's say what will happen with parents is parents will have perfectly reasonable conversations with their children, trying to guide them according to their own values. The children will be encouraged to report that through school and through other means, and that will result in some cases, families being torn apart. But that's just a price you have to pay in order to enforce your ideology on everyone in Scotland. Now, of course, the danger with this is that instead of it producing, people who really get into trouble, get into hot water. I mean, that will happen with some people, but for a lot of people, a lot of organisations, they'll think, we need to be a bit wiser now. We need to make sure this doesn't happen to us. So we're just going to back off from the issue. We're not going to talk about it. We'll be a bit more careful because, it's the time we're living in. So we'll just have to be wise and avoid these sorts of conversations. And I think that will be the most insidious effect of this bill when it arrives, is it will suppress the views of a substantial section of society. Meanwhile, how's it working out? Transgender ideology, how's that working out in people's lives? Not so well. I mean, my personal view, people who go down the road of homosexual relationships, how does that tend to work out? Again, the evidence is, it's not opinion, the evidence is that it tends to correlate with basically worse outcomes for virtually anything you can measure. So people are going down these paths. It don't necessarily work out very well in a lot of cases, but anyone who suggests people reconsider or may consider going down a different path, then you're a criminal. That's the way we're going. So welcome to Scotland 2022. We will continue to monitor this as it goes through the Parliament. But I hope that was interesting, and hope to see you at the Scottish Family Party Conference on the 12th of November, next Saturday in Dunfermline. Go to our social media, you can get your tickets there. It would be great to see you. Right, thanks for watching.